Welcome to today's webinar titled Designing a Modern SharePoint Intranet. I'm your presenter, Dougie Wood. I'm the Creative Director here at Valto, and I'm also a Microsoft MVP. This webinar is for those looking to either create a brand new SharePoint intranet or refresh an existing SharePoint Online intranet to make it look modern and leverage the most useful features of SharePoint to ensure you're getting the engagement from your audience that you want your intranet to receive. So first off, let's talk a bit about SharePoint usage. So there's 200 million worldwide users of SharePoint Online. They're daily users of SharePoint for accessing company information and documents. 80% of Fortune 500 companies trust SharePoint Online as their technology to host their intranet platform. 200,000 organizations of all different sectors, sizes, for many different purposes, from sharing news and events and single source of truths, are using SharePoint Online. And 75% of the market share for content and collaboration technologies on the market is dominated by SharePoint, leading the way for the past 20 years. So SharePoint really is the place, the technology to use if you're looking to build a modern intranet. But it's about finding balance. Now, every intranet has a different balance. So you've probably worked in many different organizations in the past before, and you've seen different organizations will take slightly different approaches to their intranet. They've all got very similar types of functionality, but at different levels. Some might prefer heavy kind of functionality, so in terms of navigation, searches, things like that, versus the aesthetic. So some organizations really want to kind of push their brand. So they want a lot of their imagery, they want videos, they want sliders, they want all of that. So they're much more looking at the aesthetics of their intranet. So the first thing of finding a balance is the functionality versus the aesthetics. So where do you sort of fit? Now, I tend to find when I'm working directly with an IT department that's designing an intranet, they'll heavily focus on the functionality. There'll be very limited imagery and news and things like that. It's much more about the navigation that is on the page. Whereas if I'm working much more with a heavy kind of creative, marketing or comms type of team, they're more likely to lean towards the aesthetics of an intranet and what it looks like, how it feels, what you're communicating, and what messages are presented there. But it's really about finding that right balance. So think about your organization. So the first step of this is thinking about your specific organization, about where you sit on that. Think of it as like a seesaw. And are you leaning more towards functionality? Or are you leaning more towards the kind of aesthetics and finding that sweet spot? The next thing that you'll need to be finding balance with is looking at the manual versus automation. Now, we're going to talk a bit more about this as we move through today's presentation. But think about the manual effort that's required versus automation. Now, what I mean by that is things like news feeds, event feeds, quite often they rely quite heavily on manual input. Whereas automation, so things like pulling through the latest video from YouTube or the latest Twitter tweet, that can be automated. So there's a certain balance between what you can do manually, how much time that's going to take up, versus the automation element of an intranet. The next thing that you need to find balance with is the navigation versus search. And we're going to go into more detail about navigation later on in this webinar, but it's thinking about everybody finds things differently. So the way I find something might be completely different to the way that you're going to find something. So the navigation is something to be thinking about in terms of, are you going to have a very linear kind of step-by-step kind of navigation? Or are you going to require that somebody uses the search box to find content? And where do you kind of draw that line? Do you expect that your user is going to be heavy navigation focused? Or is it going to be something... Sorry, I just had a Teams call pop up there. I just put myself on Do Not Disturb. So just thinking then about this navigation versus search. Navigation quite often is built in across the top bar. We're going to take a look at this in a second. But there's other areas of navigation. So we'll talk a bit more about those web parts that you can use and different areas of navigation, whereas search is always across the top. So people are searching in different areas, and also depending on where you search inside of Microsoft 365, you will actually get different results. So at the very top layer of an intranet, you're searching across all the sites, whereas as you move into a specific site, you're only searching for the content within that site. And if you move to a document library, you're only searching the documents in that document library. Again, these types of things sometimes end users aren't familiar with. So you've got to weigh up the kind of navigation versus the search. Then we're thinking about navigation versus content. So this is more about when you're designing pages, like a home page of the intranet, how much navigation you're going to have on there. So again, we're going to be looking at different web parts later on, but are you going to be having some quick links? Are you going to have some tiles as your navigation? Or are you going to weigh that up with the content, that's the news articles, events, imagery, call to actions, things like that? So you've got to weigh up the kind of the navigation versus content to make sure that it's right for the audience that's looking at this intranet. If they're going to be people that are expecting to use this purely for navigation, then using too much imagery, too many sliders, too many news, it's going to put people off what they're there to use it for. Whereas vice versa, if they're going there to find updates about the organization, then they don't want to be overwhelmed with navigational functionality. Then you're thinking about finding balance about how much content to create. Again, we're going to be, if I can get my words out, we're going to dive in deeper onto this later in the webinar, but how much content you create on your intranet really comes down to who's going to be creating content. So again, identify who's going to be content creators. Are you going to just have marketing or a comms team creating content? Is content going to come from senior management or even the board? Is content going to come from almost like the kind of the departments themselves, the teams within the departments? Where is the content going to come from, and how much content is there going to be? Again, we'll talk a bit more about that later on. But when it comes down to content, you need to reverse engineer the amount of content. So you need to be thinking about how much content can you possibly create compared to what you can then show on an intranet. So let's say, for example, if you've got a home page which has got 10 news articles on it, if you're only going to create one news article a month, that's 10 months worth of news articles that are going to be on there. And from experience, you really don't want intranet articles hanging around for 10 months, because you'll be looking at you'll be on the intranet in August and still seeing a post about the Christmas party, for example, and it just looks totally out of place. It makes the intranet look stagnant and it starts to lose its value. So think about that. Think about if you're going to create it once a month, maybe only show 1 or 2, maybe 3 maximum news articles, so that there's only, say, a quarter's worth of updates and news articles that are showing on that homepage. And again, just there, where is content coming from? Again, thinking about if you're going to be creating 1 news article a month, is that coming from the comms department? Is that coming from a head of department? Where is that content coming from? Before you commit to thinking about your design and your layout, you need to be thinking about how much content is actually going to be on there. So that's the kind of the preamble to this. So let's dive in and start looking at some examples of intranet homepages. So this is the first example of an intranet homepage, and it's actually a customized version of the type of template you would see when you first create a SharePoint communication site, by which I mean it's got that hero web part across the top. Now this layout is much more favored by people that are leaning more towards the functionality, the navigation of a SharePoint site, rather than the aesthetic looks of a SharePoint site. So with most home pages of an intranet, we refer to them as hub sites, because the hub is the kind of connection between all the different sites. And you typically have this kind of navigation bar across the top, which can have sort of drop downs underneath it, which are often referred to as a mega menu. But in SharePoint, we call it the hub site navigation bar. We've got other navigation areas here, but we're going to talk a bit more about navigation later on. This is more first about just giving you a bit of a look and feel of an intranet homepage. So this is where we've got the tiles across the top. Now, because this is a very functional navigation related layout, we're expecting that probably these tiles, people are going to land on them and jump directly off to something else. whether it's related to the policies, maybe someone wants to submit an expense request or a leave request. They're usually things which are tiles that are taking you to an area that your users are going to want to quickly access. And we can change these tiles. We can change the background images, we can change the text which sits on top of it, and we can change the link of where it goes to. As I scroll down, we can then have a little bit of sort of the more dynamic or aesthetic kind of content, so things like news. So this news feed has only got the latest 2 news articles, because maybe we're thinking we're only going to be creating a news article once a month, for example. We've got things like weather. So things like weather or world clocks is a great way to fill space with static kind of content. Well, it is dynamic in the sense that it will update itself, obviously, but it means then there's no manual sort of changing or time required to keep updating that content. So right back at the beginning when we talked about finding the balance, when you're finding the balance between manual and automation, there's certain things like this where you could fill a bit of space with useful content about, say, the weather between the different offices. So if I was, say for example, if I had 5 different offices that I might be traveling between, I could see what the weather's at the different offices. Or if I'm working with offices across the world, then I could see what time it is in that particular location. So those are useful bits of kind of content which we don't need to be manually updating all the time. We've then got things like the events web part. So the events web part is a good way of rolling up events. Now those could be physical events like training, or get-togethers, parties, conferences, things like that. Or they could just be key dates. So things like year-end, things like that. Or when an audit is happening, or any of those type of key dates that you want people to be aware that something is happening, then the events web part is a great place for that. We've also got like a countdown web part. So this might be to a new product launch or to a certain event. We've got the useful links web part. So the useful links web part is one of these navigation web parts we'll talk about later on, but it is a way of providing quick links to resources, files, folders, pages in SharePoint, or to apps and websites externally. As long as you've got a URL, a hyperlink, you can navigate to whatever you like. We could also use things like dynamic content rollup. So this is actually the highlighted content web part, which is pulling out documents from our policy document library so we can see changes which are being made to the latest policy documents. And at the very bottom, we then also have this, again, is a quick links web part. It's exactly the same as this web part here, but it's just displayed slightly differently with some branded icons, for example. And we've just got a bit of a footer area of the navigation. So this is, again, quite a more functional layout. We're expecting that most people that land on this, they're coming here mostly for navigation rather than receiving content. We're expecting them to almost hit this as a splash page and bounce off somewhere else. Whereas our second layout, now this layout is a bit more aesthetically focused. There's a bit of a better balance. Now it's not all the way on the other end of the scale of it being just about being aesthetics and look and feel and brand. I would say this one is more of a kind of middle balanced one, and you'll see why as we kind of scroll through. Again, we've got that sort of hub navigation bar across the top, which we set up with all of our hub sites. Then the actual page content has got a slideshow. Now this slideshow, it can be actually anything you want. It can be a set of links, but usually it is the news, and it's the news which is specific to the kind of the company, the organization. It's news and announcements related to content that everybody should be aware of. The reason being is typically then we have a secondary news area, which is more specific to business units or departments or locations around the world, that's slightly lower down, so you can see content which is specific to a certain sector of the business. We've also got that useful links web part on the right hand side, and you can see this pairs nicely with that slideshow when you've got the right amount of links put inside of it. But again, we're linking to key things that we think that our employees, our staff are going to want to get to. So things like raising an IT support ticket, or looking at training videos, or submitting a leave request. These are all things which people want to quickly do. So we're putting a button right there on the landing page. So you've got a mixture of the kind of the news items, and we've got a mixture of the kind of navigational links as well. As we scroll down further, we've got what we call the call to action web parts. So these call to action web parts, we can provide a title. We can also change the button text as well. We can change the background image and where the button is actually linking to. But again, it's great to have kind of this balance. So we've got this balance of kind of using imagery. So we can use branded imagery to make it our look and feel. But we also have this navigation. So linking it to key things like policies, branded materials, forms, templates, all those types of things. Maybe a suggestion box. Things like that are typically linked to from a call to action web part. We then have a people web part on the right hand side. Now this is an area that we could maybe have our senior leadership team, and then when you click on them, you can see their contact information, who they work with, who they report to, things like that. And basically all the details that we need. We can even start a chat with this person directly in Teams or send them an email if we wanted to. Now, again, this is something that you want to take with a pinch of salt. A lot of people think, wow, that's brilliant, that's great. But you want to weigh up when you're designing your intranet, whether having people's contact information readily available, especially on the home page, is that something that you truly want to do? Are you going to end up with your kind of directors, your CEOs getting messages directly from your end users about things? So it's sometimes useful, not always. Sometimes, actually, a really good example of where I've seen the people web part used on an intranet homepage is when there is things like who's the first aider in the office, who's the fire marshal, things like that. So if there was ever an emergency and you needed to find out who was the kind of first aider that was on duty, you can go to the people web part and find that out. You can include more things, as I say, aesthetic, more related to your brand. So it's a quote or a mission statement or something like that. You could provide that directly on your intranet to make sure it's sort of front and center. People are seeing it all of the time. Then as we scroll further down, we've got more news. Again, this is the same news web part. Now, this news web part here is exactly the same as the news web part that we saw on the last template. And it's also the same as this slideshow. It's exactly the same web part. It's just got a slightly different layout. You can choose whether you have it as a tiled option, a slider, a list. There's loads of different options of the ways that you could display your news items. But this area here, typically with this type of layout, is a secondary kind of news area. So it's news maybe from department sites or from areas of the business. Maybe there are geographical locations. Maybe you've got news that's coming from the US, from Europe, from Asia, things like that, and you're rolling them up into this. So you could say, okay, well, I'm interested what's going on in the US at the moment, and then I could click through to that by selecting on where it's come from. It will take me through to see all of the news items that have been created in that area. So again, this is another kind of place that we have this kind of news. But again, go back to thinking about finding your balance. Don't have loads of news items on your homepage if you don't forecast that people are going to create a lot of content. And this is, I suppose, speaking to people directly on this, but you tend to find people will promise the world when you're first designing an intranet. Say, yeah, we'll create a news article every single week and you can have loads and blah, blah, blah. I would take everything with a bit of a pinch of salt. When you're kind of getting people to confirm that they're giving news items, things like that, think about worst case scenario. If you only got, say, 50% of what you were promised, what would that actually look like? Now, you can always scale these news web parts. You can always choose to, say, only show, say, for example, this is showing 6 tiles. You might say only show 3, for example. So you could always scale it, but then you're back to square one in terms of designing the layout a little bit of the homepage to make sure that things align and fit properly on the page. Then on the right hand side, we've got things like, again, this is more informational, and you can get this to pull from SharePoint lists if you wanted to. So there's a certain level of automation you can do, but these are called quick charts. And then the reason being is because they're so quick and simple to update. In fact, they're so quick and simple, I'm actually just going to show you. I'm going to jump into edit mode and just really quickly show you. I can't help myself. I'm just going to scroll down here. And on the web part itself, if I click on the pencil to edit it, you can see here, if I wanted to change these figures, let's just say change this to 1,500, you can see it just updates in live time. It makes it so easy to update that that's why it's called a quick chart. And then we can see it in a column chart, or we can make it into a pie chart. Those are the two options you've got. Now, this is really simplistic. that's why it's called a quick chart. You've got two types of charts. You can show the column chart, the pie chart. You can enter the data. You can get it to pull from a list or a library if you wanted to. If you want to show a certain amount of documents that are categorized in a certain way or a certain status or something like that. So there's a certain level of a little bit of automation, but it is very simplistic. And if you want to have more advanced types of graphs in here, then there is a out-of-the-box Power BI web part that you can plug in, and then you can plug in your Power BI reports, KPIs, dashboards directly into SharePoint. So if you want something more advanced, that's the way to go about doing it. But I really like this, and ironically, I kind of stole this idea from a client that I was working with to show this. Now, what they were doing is internally, their IT department were running phishing tests. And if you're not familiar with a phishing test, what that essentially is they create a fake, dodgy-looking email that they send out to all of their staff internally, and then it will say something silly like, oh, you've been locked out of your Microsoft 365 account. Click on this link to provide your password to redeem it before everything's deleted. It's some sort of scare-mongering type of tactics. Now, what actually they're doing is they're trying to see who's silly enough to click on that link, and then they're recording that back. Then what they're doing is they're publishing their findings. So they're saying when they first did it, 1,500 staff were silly enough to click on the link, and then they provided a bit of training, a bit of awareness of what they're doing, and then that was 1,200 staff. Then they provided a bit more training, and then it went down to 590 staff the next time that they ran it. So you can see this is just take it with a pinch of salt. This is not the real numbers, but you can see that this is a great way of publicizing to the wider organization an internal campaign or project that is showing kind of it sort of what benefit and value it's bringing to the organization, and it's showing it on the homepage. I've seen other people use these quick charts for things like showing how many sales they've made in a period of time, or how many calls they've taken to a contact center, or all those types of things which are useful bits of information for people to stay in the know of the organization. Then further down, again, we've got that upcoming events web part, but we've just put some images in here just to sort of make this look a bit nicer. And then we've got a call to action web part. Now, it's worth mentioning that all these web parts, they are in fact responsive, meaning they'll fit the space that we've given them. So this call to action web part is filling this full space left to right, and it looks quite wide, but it's exactly the same web part, which is here. It's just the fact that we've got these 3 columns in this section. I'm going to talk a bit more about sections later on, but you can see that this actually is the same web part. It's just filling the space that we've given it. The final thing on this particular layout is we've also got a video. Now, this could actually come from YouTube. It could come from Stream, and we'll talk a bit about sort of video content later on. But thinking about video content as part of your homepage design is going to be really important. In fact, that brings me on to my next slide, which is integrating video. So research that was conducted by Cisco found that video traffic within enterprise networks was projected to account for around 60% of overall traffic within a corporate network. That's a lot. So a lot of people are now using video as a method of receiving information, educating themselves. And in fact, if you're watching this video right now, you're testament to that. And video content is expected to get, well, it's expected from people now. It's no longer something that you think, oh, it's nice to have. It's expected to have video content. When you're onboarding staff, typically they're expecting to find videos about training, learning, things like that. And that comes from our personal life. We're all using social medias like Facebook or TikTok or Instagram and things like that, where we're seeing videos all the time. When you go on your break, go on your lunch, you're probably going on your phone, you're looking at these social medias, you're using videos and things like that. So why aren't we thinking about integrating video into our day-to-day work lives as well? So instead of a text newsletter, create a video. They're really simple, really easy to do. You can use PowerPoint to record your screen. So if you're wanting to do a little training video, you can actually use PowerPoint to record your screen. You can record your webcam if you wanted to. You don't have to. You can use your audio as well, so you can record this. Now, I'm actually using PowerPoint right now to record this. So it's really simple and easy to use something like PowerPoint. But there's loads of other tools. Microsoft have got another tool that they call Clipchamp. So if you want to do a lot more editing, so if you're a bit more bothered about the editing, then Clipchamp is a way that you can kind of get that timeline approach. So you can put in multiple videos. sort of transitions, music for your video, all of that sort of stuff. So don't feel that your videos need to be this kind of Hollywood studio quality. It doesn't take weeks of time to create these videos. In fact, actually, I've seen like the likes of CEOs recording videos from their mobile phone whilst they're out and about. They're walking around a city to their next meeting or something like that, and they've just had a great meeting. Something's going to change. Something's a new idea. They've just signed a contract, maybe something cutting edge is happening right now that they want to let their whole organization know about. They can record it on their phone, say, hey guys, this is the update, this is what's going on, I'm really excited for this, boom, boom, boom. They can then either themselves or filter it through a sort of comms or marketing team first. That can then be posted to, say, for example, Stream, which is basically like the internal YouTube of Microsoft 365, or it could be posted directly into SharePoint as a video on the homepage, and people can see that and they're kept up to date really quickly. So I say it doesn't have to be Hollywood studio quality, and often people find that raw videos are more trustworthy. And what I mean by that is that if something's heavily edited, you typically find that people pick up on the fact of that, and they realize that it's something that is over edited for a reason. Whereas something that is raw videos, and you might even notice yourself when you're using things like TikTok and things like that, videos now which are popping up quite often are people just walking down a beach or walking through a city centre, and they're recording themselves saying, hey, did you know about X, Y, and Z and blah, blah, blah. And they're advertisements. And it's because people actually trust people. People trust real pictures of people rather than stock pictures. They trust real videos of real people rather than heavily edited, well-lit things in studios and things like that. So again, don't over worry about that. It's better to have some video content going up like that than, rather than something that takes ages to publish and only getting one video a year sort of thing. So there's two different ways, as I say, you can get videos onto, well, technically three, actually. You've got the YouTube web part. So if your videos are being published to the public via YouTube, you can embed them directly into SharePoint as well. So you can make sure that your employees are just as much up to date as potential clients, customers that are seeing it on your YouTube feed. There is the Stream web part. Now this is moving to SharePoint as well, so it's in the kind of transition, but there is a Stream web part. Now Stream is essentially, as I say, an internal YouTube. It's somewhere that you can create channels of videos, maybe onboarding videos, CEO updates, things like that, and you can embed the whole channel if you wanted to, or an individual video directly into SharePoint. The third way of doing it is if you're using something external like Vimeo or something like that, you can also use like an embed web part to embed that video directly into SharePoint. But you can sometimes run up against a couple of issues with those types of things with authentication and things like that. Typically with public YouTube videos or Stream, you tend not to hit those types of issues. But that's integrating video. Now, really cannot stress, think about how you can get video content into your intranet. The next thing to think about when designing your intranet is your navigation. So a quote here is, navigation is the key to exploring the uncharted, the gateway to discovery, and the path to understanding. I'm not too sure where that quote came from, but I really liked it when I was looking for quotes. I thought that really summed it up quite well. Now, as I mentioned earlier, everyone will find things differently. So how I find something will be different the way you find something. So let's say, for example, I'm looking for a working from home policy. Now, in SharePoint, there could be a couple of places that could live. It could live under human resources and then policies, or there might be a dedicated area just called policies and procedures that I can go to. Now, there might be different ways I can get there. Let's say, for example, we have a policies library that's got nothing to do with any department, but all policies from every department lives in that one policy library, which is very common. But a user might be looking under human resources for policies. Now you can provide a link to that other area, so that if I was a user looking onto human resources and I couldn't find it, I could still get a link that took me to the right place. But this is the first kind of bit about balancing navigation, where we're thinking about duplicating links versus single links. So sometimes with an intranet, you tend to find that there are duplications of links. Now, if you remember that first design that I was showing you earlier, we had that footer links across the bottom. Now, those links were basically duplicates of what we could find in the hub navigation bar and some other areas of the page. But sometimes people do like that duplicating links because, again, different people will be looking in different areas of the site and the pages for different things. So it's a bit of a sort of toss-up between, if you're going to duplicate links, you can have the same link but in different places. Are you changing the wording of it? What's the purpose of it? What happens if that link changes? You've got to remember that you've got it in two different places. So you've got to think about, if you're duplicating links, why are you doing it? Is there two different paths that people might be going down to find it? Are there going to be different wordings, language that's used, things like that? Then consider that versus just having the link in just one place. So you only have to remember to update that link if something changes in one place. It's worth thinking about with navigation as well, that your eyes will naturally go to the top right hand corner, and then they move left and then down. So just with my mouse here, I'm going to show you. If I was to hit a SharePoint site, actually I'm looking up here first, going along, and then going down, and then I start looking around the rest of the page. And that's why at top of SharePoint they've put the cog across the top right hand corner, and then the navigations across the top up here. So hub navigations across the top up here. So consider that when you're designing your page. Then think about the hub navigation bar versus a site navigation bar. So let's just jump back into an example. So a hub navigation bar is designed to be consistent throughout the intranet. And this is the hub navigation bar across the top. So what I mean by that is no matter where I go in my intranet, this navigation bar will follow me around. It will always be there, meaning that I don't have to go all the way back to the home page on my intranet to then navigate to, say, a different app or a different department site. The hub navigation bar can be up to 3 levels deep. So you can see under apps, we've got, say, we've got training portal and then learning pathways or training metrics or training skills, which sit underneath it. So we can have layer 1 apps, layer 2 training portal, layer 3 learning pathways. So we can have up to 3 layers. You can't have any more than that, but you can have, say, for example, 2 layers, so just departments, then finance, departments HR, for example. Or like where we've got customers, that's just layer 1. So it's just one clickable link. So that's the hub navigation bar. It's designed to be consistent throughout everywhere we go. Now that is compared to the site navigation bar, which is specific to the current site that we are looking at. So this site navigation bar, again, we can have drop downs. Unfortunately, in this example, I don't actually have that, but we can have drop downs within there as well. That can be up to 3 layers deep as well. It works exactly the same. In fact, actually, the editing menu works exactly the same. The only difference is the site navigation bar is specific to the current site that we're looking at. So if I was to move from this whole intranet page to a department site, then that site navigation would be completely different. So if I just move to, say, finance, then this site navigation bar here is completely different, whereas the hub navigation bar remains exactly the same. The hero web part is that tiled web part that we saw. And in fact, actually, this is a real picture from a training session that I was with North Wales Fire and Rescue Service, and we were building out their intranet. And actually, you can see here, this is the hero navigation web part, which they're using to navigate to key things like policies and procedures, new starter inductions, and things like that. So that hero web part, we can change the background images, we can change the text which sits on top of it, and we can change where it's linking to as well. And all of these navigations, as I say, they can be internal or they can be external. We then got the quick links web part. So actually, these are quick link web parts. So quick link web parts are really simple and easy to use. We do need to be in edit mode. So looks like I don't actually have access to this test account. So I'm just going to go back to that because I don't have access to that last test site to edit it. Let's just say, for example, I'm going to update this page. So if I click on edit, I'm going to add a quick links web part to this. I'm going to select add web part, type in quick links, and there we go, we've got a quick links web part. Now I can call this whatever I like. I could call it useful links or company links, whatever we wanted to call it. Then we can simply click on add links in here, and we can link to SharePoint pages, or we can say from a link, and we can provide a link to something in here, say for example Google. Then click on add, and then it's added my link. I can also change to add a custom image as an icon if I wanted to, like we have done at the bottom over here. Or I can choose to use Microsoft's icons. So if I click on change, there's actually hundreds, if not thousands, of different free icons you can use in here. So I'm just going to select that little lightning bolt. And I would actually suggest use Microsoft icons if you can, because they're free. They're all in the same similar style. So they're all going to look quite nice and consistent. And then we can actually edit this web part to have different layouts. So you could have a film strip kind of options, a slideshow, it could be a grid, it could be buttons, it could be a list format, it could be small tiles. There's all sorts of different layouts that we can kind of pick with our quick links. But the idea of quick links is it's a place that you can have links which navigate either SharePoint or externally, and it's something that you can place directly inside of a SharePoint page. The next web part is a highlighted content web part. And if you remember on this particular layout, we were using that highlighted content web part to pull out documents. So once you've added the highlighted content web part to the page, which is nice and simple from this drop down, as I say, just type in highlighted content, select that. But here's a bit like a Blue Peter style one that I've made earlier. If I select this, you can see that I'm pulling data from this site collection. It's pulling documents, but I could say pull news, pull pages, pull images if I wanted to. Select what type of document type. I can apply some filters so that the title includes something. It was recently modified, it was created by somebody, or it had a managed property of some description. We can sort, so managed property, so you can say it's most recent, most viewed, things like that. But essentially this is where all the configuration is done. So it's pulling out all the policies that it finds within this particular site. Other types of navigation web parts. So we've got things like the button web part. So if you literally just wanted to add a single button clickable here. So let's say the label would be click here, and then maybe it's going to go to Google, for example, and we can choose whether the button shows in the middle, on the right hand side. These are great ways of kind of adding a little bit of a kind of navigation to a page. Not typically an intranet homepage, but maybe a sub page of an intranet, for example. And then another kind of insider tip for creating navigation is we have the option of using an image web part. So if I select on image, and let's just select, let's just select that image there. Once you've selected an image, you can actually use this as a type of navigation, because we can add in here a link, and we can add the label on top of it. So we might say, click here to find a map of our office, for example. And then we could provide a link out to that if we wanted to. So this actually is another form of navigation that sometimes people don't necessarily think of, but you can use that image web part for a navigation option as well. So it's almost like a very large call to action web part, and we can change the text so it's on top of it, and we can change the background image as well. And I didn't include this on the slide, but I'm going to give you one bonus top tip for navigation as well, because I really like the look of this. Now, if you add a one column section to the top of your page, and you add in a hero web part, and you change the hero web part to be in layers, but just one layer, this can look really good as a navigation. So let's say, for example, let's just link off to something. Let's just say our We Are Hiring page, click on insert, and there we go. We've got a nice image that's automatically pulled through. And then if we change the text, so we can put a bit of text in here. So we are hiring, blah, blah, blah. Bit of text in here. Blah, blah. And then we can change, for example, we can change whether we want a topic or not. So it might be hiring or something like that, or human resources. We want to show us from them. What the call to action says, find jobs, something like that. And then you can even provide a separate link if you wanted to from the main button link. But there you go. That's just a great way that you can have this kind of tile. And in fact, if we change the color of the background, it might even stand out a bit more like that, for example. But that's a great way you can use that web part for navigation. And I don't tend to find a lot of people know that you can use the Hero Web Part for one tiles like that, and it really does look quite nice on the page. So I'll just remove that. Cool. Then the final thing I wanted to talk about in relation to navigation is that you're not going to get this right the first time. Let's just be honest. You're not going to get the navigation perfect when you first launch your intranet. You might be able to take a little bit of analysis from previous intranets if you had one, or a bit of sort of feedback if you were to provide some feedback forms to people, surveys to say what did you like, what were you trying to find, what were you trying to navigate to on the last intranet that you couldn't find, any of those types of things. But you can also use a little bit of the analytics that's built into SharePoint to help over time figure out if people are going to a page and how long they're spending on that page. So let's say, for example, if we're linking to a expense request page, and then if we wanted to find out, well, actually, how much time was spent on that page, if I was to, this doesn't actually go to a page, it's just a dummy link, but let's just pretend we've gone to that page. Now, every SharePoint page has its analytics button, so you can click on that and a little pop-out will appear to show you the page views, so how many views it's had in the last 7, 30, 90 days, the trending on whether it's going up or not, the average time spent per user on the page, and also page traffic by time, so you can see, are they roughly accessing it sort of at the beginning of the day, end of the day. It gives you a bit of insight into how that page content is being used. So I would suggest after you've sort of launched an intranet, then use these types of things to subtly refine some of the navigation. Because if you're finding that you've got a large tile on the homepage, which is taking them to a particular page somewhere on SharePoint, and no one's actually going there, then what's the point in taking up all that space on your intranet homepage if it's content that nobody's actually navigating to? So that's navigation. Now that's one of the really important parts about designing your intranet. The next really important thing is about communication and designing your intranet for good communication. So good communication on an intranet fosters transparency, and it boosts employee engagement and streamlines information sharing across the organization. So there's multiple ways that you can use SharePoint for communication. So you can see here, there's a bit of a design that I've mocked together on the right-hand side, which actually, that's 4 different news web parts. They're all exactly the same. It's just the news web part, but we've got a slideshow news web part. We've got, I think this is, I can't remember what this is called, the featured template layout or something like that. And then we've got a sort of a list kind of template on the right-hand side, but it's all just the news web part. It's just using the slightly different layouts. So news feeds are crucial for employee engagement. It provides real-time updates and announcements, and this can be from different areas of the organization. So you could have, say, CEO updates, for example. You could have country-related news. So you can do things like what they call audience targeting, which means that you could say only show news items to specific people. So that news items, so you go to an internet homepage like this, this is very news heavy, this particular layout, but you could say only show, tag news articles with departments. So this could be, say, human resources, this one could be IT, this one's marketing, whatever it is. And then actually you could apply a filter to this to say only show news items to users of that department. So if I was working in IT, I go here, all these news items are just related to IT. They're just IT tagged with metadata related to IT. But this could be based on department, business unit, it could be office location, country location. It could be based on all sorts of stuff. So I've worked with many organizations which have sliced and diced this in many ways. And if they're creating a lot of content, then often they audience target them to make sure that people are seeing the relevant content to them, but still allowing them the opportunity to drill down into other areas if they've got an interest. So say, for example, I've worked with an enterprise organization which are based all over the world. And if, say, for example, I was in the London office, I would see mostly my homepage would be related to UK things, UK customers that we're working with, new projects, events which are going on in London, things like that. But I also had the opportunity to go and look at the US related news articles, because say, for example, I was going to take a business trip over there for a couple of weeks. I might want to first just go on there and see what's coming up, what projects are they working on, what events have they got coming up, things like that, so I could educate myself on first. But it's all about keeping employees informed about those key kind of messages and events. and encourages knowledge sharing, so people are more likely to be aware of what's going on around the organization. The engagements come via comments, likes, and shares of that content that you're producing. It also reduces duplication and increases productivity because you're reducing the duplication of messages, so emails flying around, Teams messages, things like that, and centralizing those updates. The news web parts can be displayed in many ways, as I've described there on the right-hand side, and it can pull from potentially all content from all areas of SharePoint, or just one. So I could say, for example, typically, like this slider would just pull from one area of SharePoint, which is hosted on the main SharePoint site and managed by, say, the comms or the marketing team. Whereas, say, department news might be pulling from all department sites, for example, or all country sites. So you could pull from different areas the different news articles. Or you can even make it based on the user. Now, this is a little bit kind of like dark arts, and you're kind of just handing over the control to Microsoft, but there's also kind of, dependent on what sites the user is accessing and following, then SharePoint will make its mind up about the sort of content that it thinks that user will want to know about. So you can set the source of this to be based on the current user. So that can be a little bit hit and miss, and it can take a little bit of time to get that working, but it's a good way, again, of not having to be sort of manually in control of the what content is going where. You can use metadata to filter audience targeting, so as I say, based on country, based on department, and things like that. Also, it's worth thinking about driving traffic via email newsletters. So just to quickly show you an example of this. Once you've got more news articles than will fit on a page, you'll see this button appear that says See All. If you click on that, you then also get taken to this page where you can create an email news digest. This is where you can then choose to select some key news articles which are interesting, click on Next, give it a title for your newsletter. So this might be, say, for example, my summer newsletter. You put in who you want to send it to. Now, this could be a distribution list. You put in a bit of a message, bit of text, and then you click on Send News Digest. Now, what this is doing is a lot of people are using Teams and things like that, and a lot of people would argue, say, well, people should be going to the intranet homepage for their news and things like that. Now, I would say as a temporary measure, if your organization is already used to using emails for newsletters and news digests and things like that, then this is a great way to encourage them to go to SharePoint, because what this will now do is it will generate an email with that text and with those links, but in the email they can click to go directly to the SharePoint site or open those SharePoint news articles directly from the email. Now, this is a great way of them pushing traffic into your SharePoint site from an audience that is actually currently using emails. So it's a great way of getting that traffic to convert into SharePoint and start being familiar and comfortable with using your SharePoint site instead of receiving news via email. And the final thing to mention on communication is the key dates with the events web part. So we talked earlier about the events web part, but think about using the events web part, the countdown web part, to promote when key dates are coming up. So if you've got a key important event or conference, something like that, build up a bit of hype, build up a bit of awareness using those web parts. And the final thing that I want to talk about when designing your pages on your SharePoint Intranet is the content sections. So breaking a SharePoint page into multiple content sections improves readability and allows for better presentation of diverse information. So as you're kind of scrolling through, and you will notice that most modern websites now do actually take this approach. So you'll notice when you're on a website that as you're scrolling through, the content is quite often, there's a lot of content on one page. So as you're scrolling through, the sections of the page may change slightly different colors or have different titles, slightly different layouts. So as you're scrolling down the page, you know that the content is changing, and it subtly lets that user know that the content and the context has changed. Having these sections improves user experience for SharePoint pages and increases the readability and reduces the kind of cognitive load, because you're reducing the amount of effort it takes to understand that the content has changed. It facilitates clear navigation points for users and groups related information logically for context. Also, it future-proofs for updates. So say, for example, if this Q&A section was going to change, for example, I can change a bit of text without it over changing too much of the overarching layout of the page. It enhances the visual appeal and it's more engaging. So let's just jump in and I'll just show you an example of this. So this is a department site template. Again, we've got some tiles across the top. We've got this kind of quick links. We've got an org chart. We've got some department events, news and documents. But the bottom here, we've got this FAQ kind of commonly asked questions or frequently asked questions area. And what this is it's made up of multiple sections that are made collapsible on a page. So if I go into edit mode, you'll see that actually the SharePoint sites are made up of multiple sections. So this is one section, this is a section, and this is a full width hero section. So all of these are different sections. And now these Q&As are actually all just different sections on a page. So I can add a new section by clicking on this plus button on the left-hand side. And then I can say, for example, a 2-column section. I can edit the section and say that I want to make it collapsible because I want to give it a title with a little section here. So this might be, say, what do I do if XYZ happens? Then I'm going to add an image. So this layout looks like I'm not choosing the right one there. So 1/3 left, there we go. That looks roughly about right. I'm going to add an image web part into here. It'd help if I could spell image. There we go. And then I'm going to add an image into this. Now I could either use recent images, upload my own images, or as a really helpful top tip, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this stock image library. Now this stock image library is really good and it's totally free from Microsoft, built into SharePoint, built into things like Word and PowerPoint and things like that as well. It's all the same imagery. And there's a search box. So you can either search by like a color. So say, for example, if I was looking for things which are red, I could search for red. Or I could search by a topic. So say, for example, I'm looking for things which are like an office or a meeting or something like that. Then I can find an image that I think is relevant. So I'm going to say, I quite like this picture here. I can select that. And then that will just add my image into the page. So as I say, the top tip there is use that stock image library. If you're using things like some stock image kind of libraries online, quite often you have to pay for them. Whereas actually this is completely free. All the images are really high quality, large sizes. They scale really well and they're responsive. So top tip there, do take full advantage of that image library. Then I'm just going to add a little bit of text into here. So add in some text. So I'll just say this is some text. There we go. Full stop. We put in a couple of line breaks just to make it look a bit more realistic. And then the final things I'm going to do is I want to make sure that this section is collapsible. I want to show a divider, so it puts a split between it. And make sure that the expanding arrow is on the left-hand side because the one above it is on the left-hand side. So rather than being on the right-hand side, so it's on the left-hand side. And the default is whether it's expanded or not. I'm going to say it should be collapsed because I want all my sort of Q&As to be collapsed automatically. So then I click on republish to publish that. And then when I scroll down here, you can see now I've got my little content section here. But that's just an example of building an FAQ with these sections. All of these are sections, and as I scroll through, you can see I've got slightly different background colors for the sections. So I know I'm going from my kind of welcome, kind of a bit of sort of bio text, to the kind of org chart and news, and then onto events and documents and useful kind of content and things like that. So I know that the content is changing. So there's multiple ways that we can use those sections to make sure that the design of our pages is really, really effective. So let's say that's the content section. So make sure you're making the most of those and breaking out the content of your site into those different sections. And also make the most of the Microsoft stock image library. I say this all the time. And people still go away and buy their own imagery and things like that. Okay, I understand it if you're trying to find something that's very branded, but you'll tend to find that there's a lot of imagery in there which you'll be able to use. And I've seen the Microsoft imagery that's used all over the place, even on different sort of publications and things like that. So take a look at it. It will be useful for you, and it'll probably save you time and maybe even money on buying stock images. So before we move on to the kind of Q&A section, I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't trying to upsell you some of the services that Valto can offer you. So Valto offer some really amazing workshop services related to SharePoint. So we offer a SharePoint Intranet Design workshop. So at the time of recording, and I do have to stress it's the time of recording, and T's and C's, Valto reserve the right to periodically change our costs and all that sort of stuff. But at the time of recording, it's only £1,500. And we go into talking about the design of your intranet, the hub site, the home pages, whether you need business unit sites as a sublayer, whether you need department sites as a sublayer of that, whether you need team sites as a sublayer of that. We talked about policy management and all the kind of functionality that SharePoint contains, along with things like retention, so how long do you need to keep the content for, and sensitivity of who should be able to access it, and loads of other useful things. So if you're in the process of designing a new intranet, I couldn't recommend more that you reach out to us today to discuss booking in a SharePoint Intranet workshop, so we can help talk you through that process, and then we can give you a fixed price for the services that we offer related to that, whether it's the full build of the intranet or helping bridge some knowledge gaps. We also offer some other services, so we do the same for things like Power Apps development. So if you're looking at building a Power App, we can help with that. Or if you're starting your journey with the Power Platform, we also offer a strategy workshop to make sure that your data is properly governed and secure. We also offer things like tenant-to-tenant migration. So if you're looking at merging some organizations and you're putting together multiple Microsoft 365 tenants, we can offer services around that, as well as general security and backup of Microsoft 365. And of course, so much more. If you've got any needs related to Microsoft 365, please do reach out to us today. You can reach out to us at hello@valto.co.uk. And of course, any questions, you can let us know. We are now going to be on standby. I'm going to put the sort of video on silence in a second. Any questions, please do ask the questions below under the video, so where you've got the kind of the likes, comments, things like that. And I should also mention, if you haven't yet, please do subscribe to our channel. We are putting out monthly webinars now, loads of useful kind of videos and how-to guides and things like that. So do subscribe to our channel. As I say, I'm now going to let this run out for the next 5 minutes. If you've got any questions, put them below, and we will do our best to answer them. If you want to talk to us about getting some support or help with your SharePoint Intranet, again, emails at hello@valto.co.uk. Thank you very much for your time today watching this video, and also keep your eyes peeled for our next webinar. So as I say, we're going to be doing a series of SharePoint related webinars. There's going to be a webinar every month, so look out for that. It will either be related to SharePoint, Power Apps, Azure, or one of the other awesome Microsoft 365 services. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll catch you next time.